Welcome to this edition of By Design, where we explore everything to do with what drives the business of good design and why. China's new urbanization is a key task in this year's government work report presented at the Two Sessions policy meeting recently, and signaling that urban development is a priority. The plan calls for rural migrants to gain permanent urban residency as aging neighborhoods undergo renewal. Infrastructure gets a strategic overhaul by upgrading flood defenses and utilities while optimizing valuable land. And smart digital systems expand alongside senior-friendly designs and upgraded community services. The bottom line, cities become more livable, resilient, and tech-enabled, driving economic growth. China's cities have been reshaped by bold architectural visions over the past 3 decades. This transformation is now becoming global acclaim as a Chinese architect claims the Pritzker Architecture Prize, its architecture's highest award. This highlights the country's influence in world design. Joining us to talk about China's urban development and the role architecture plays in this is Antony Wood. He's a professor of practice and director of the Masters of Tall Buildings at Urban Habitat at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Welcome to the show. Great having you. And I'd like to know, how are cities worldwide reimagining urban spaces to prioritize community needs?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's interesting, actually, because we've just passed the 5-year anniversary of the declaration of COVID-19 as a worldwide pandemic. And if you cast your mind back to 5 years ago, or the month after that, many people thought that COVID-19 would be the death of cities. There was this mass migration out to the suburbs, and that was, significant overkill in terms of the fear of what that was doing. And 5 years later, I think cities have bounced back. We learned a lot through COVID in terms of wellness and the spaces inside buildings, and also the planning of urban spaces. But most cities of the world, I think, have bounced back from COVID, and the urban spaces that have been created, that are being created, are far better than the kind of windswept concrete plazas of the of a few decades ago. What interests me, my field, is tall buildings and urban density, and one of the most exciting movements in my field has been the creation of public and communal spaces at height, not only at the ground plane, but sky gardens and sky bridges and public spaces at height, which is, especially in China, by the way, which is really quite amazing.
Anthony, you're bringing up an interesting point, and we're seeing these cities bounce back. But are they progressing towards, sustainable urban design?
Well, sustainable urban design. Well, there's a term, isn't it? What does that actually mean? And the word sustainability, what does that mean? I mean, are we talking about energy? For 10, 20 years, we were talking about energy consumption in buildings. We've got to reduce energy consumption. Now, as we've made progress towards renewables, by the way, there are days where the UK, for example, produces 100% of its building energy needs without any fossil fuels. So we're getting on top of the energy. Now it's about carbon. Now it's about materials and carbon. But when you talk about sustainable urban design, my mind starts to think about social sustainability. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So sustainability is an abused word. It means, the energy equation is all about infrastructure, really. It's all about urban infrastructure and national grid infrastructure in terms of how energy is provided. Carbon is about the materials that go into buildings and how, the kind of the CO2 production that's involved in that. But social sustainability, and I'd go even further and say cultural sustainability, is something different. That's not really about energy or carbon. It's about how spaces are created and buildings are created and the expressions and how those buildings relate to the people that inhabit them, and not just inhabit the buildings, but inhabit the cities in which those buildings exist.
And on this, do you find a distinction between China's approach to urban planning and models from other countries?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, China China's built cities at a rate which is completely unprecedented in the history of mankind. And not only has it built cities, there are many cities that develop. By the way, the United Nations statistics still show that 1 million people are urbanizing on this planet every week. So you talked about, the two joint sessions in China and how they prioritized urbanization. And you even said about the movement of rural people into urban centers for a better quality of life. Well, that is happening all around the world. That means that we as a species on this planet need to house 1 million new urban dwellers every week. So then where do those people go? They're not going in new cities, they're going in expanded existing cities. And I firmly believe, and many people believe, they've got to go into denser vertical cities rather than the American model of the expanded horizontal suburban city. And this is where China, I think, has been quite impressive on two levels. One is it understood that the most significant part of a successful city is infrastructure. It's infrastructure, and it's much the infrastructure between cities as it is the city, the high-speed rail. So China understood mass transit within, cities, that it had to get the infrastructure right. And now you can go to wherever, Beijing, Shenzhen, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and you will experience the best transport infrastructure that exists on the planet, because in London and New York, these mass transit systems are now 100+ years old, yeah? So number one, China got the infrastructure equation right, yeah? Number two, now this wasn't so great to begin with. When I started in China 20, 30 years ago, it was mostly Western architects who were designing certainly the high-rise buildings, that again is part of my sphere that I'm interested in. By the way, a lot of those buildings were designed to an international palette of architecture, and what that did was and that's not just China, it's around the world. It starts to homogenize cities. Cities around the world are different because they evolved to a different set of circumstances, environmentally, physically, materially, culturally, and modern architecture, and I think high-rise buildings played to an international palette, and that started to homogenize cities and homogenized cities in China, whereas they, if you looked at the skyline, it's like, is that Shanghai or is it Sydney or is it Seattle? They all began to look the same. And, maybe five or 6 years ago, President Xi said, enough. He said, no more crazy buildings, no more, kind of Western. By the way, this wasn't necessarily because Western architects were arrogant and were superimposing, international Western designs. It was because the clients for them, the Chinese clients or wherever, Indonesian clients or Brazilian clients, wanted the tall building was a show of modernity, and so they wanted that modern international expression. But that started to change. There's been a clampdown on gratuitous tall buildings in China, and I think now, it's not a surprise that a Chinese architect has won the Pritzker Prize, as per your past segment. There are now more of the buildings in China have been designed by Chinese architects, and actually now Chinese architects are also working all around the world, even on skyscrapers as well. So, but the reason I mention that goes back to the cultural and the social sustainability. I believe that skyscrapers in China should be Chinese skyscrapers, not necessarily just in an aesthetic way, but certainly in an environmental way.
Antony, I'd love to continue, but we have to leave it there for now at least. Antony Wood, thank you very much. Great having you. And that's it for this edition of By Design. But for more special content, please visit our website, cgtn.com.